Oh, okay. I don't see myself. Hi folks, this is International Master John Watson, and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide players with a forum to ask questions about chess and the chess world. It's a fairly new venue for this show, which is now on the YouTube ICC channel. If you want to participate in the chat, which is on the right of your screen, then and ask me questions, which I hope you will need to be logged into YouTube, which is already automatic for most of you, but if not, you can always, if you have a Gmail account, for example, it's quite easy. I see an ad coming on. That's not me. I wish that was me. And or you can simply log in and set up a username and a password. Just follow the YouTube sign-in links. So if you want to ask questions in advance, anytime during the week, and I've got a lot of questions, but you aren't always using these methods, there are 3 good ways. First, I have a new email address. I guess I recommend this pretty strongly since people aren't that into Twitter. The email address is askimwatson, ASKIMWATSON, askimwatson@chessclub.com, and I'll get those right away. We still have a Twitter channel, which is hashtag AskIamWatson, so you can send a tweet to AskIamWatson with a question for the show, but people don't seem to be taking advantage of that. Maybe chess players are old-fashioned. Finally, you can send a message to me at my ICC handle, and this is a good way too, John L. Watson, which is another way to reach me. So you just message space John L. Watson and then put your question or comment. And I should say about that in my earlier shows, almost all of them, I've gotten a lot of questions to my ICC handle. So it's interesting that I haven't gotten as many to this show when you have your chance to ask pretty much whatever you want. Okay, and the alternative is to ask a question live right now during the show on the chat box, which is to your right. You can ask about anything related to chess. I get a lot of questions, not surprisingly, about openings, which is good since I have some expertise in those, and I've taught them for many years, just about every opening at one point or another. Chess strategy, leading players, chess books and videos, because I've written a lot of them and reviewed a lot of them, and I know most of the authors. So, and of course, anything else that comes to mind. I've got a question on improvement this week. I have a question on correspondence chess. So, it's a lot of fun. Almost every question I get is good, and I can just use more of them. All right, so let me first do a clarification of something from last week. I like to do this. I think if there's been a question I didn't really know the answer to, and there are a couple of those, it's good to sort of show something. The first one is this question from James Schuyler, his book, The Dark Knight System. And we talked about this, and someone sent a question about it, a very good one. And let's just play E4 first, I guess, which we'll transpose here. And by the way, if you take immediately, it may not be quite as accurate because he has an extra option besides F takes he of playing there. And that ending may be better for white, but it's certainly not clear at all. Schuyler talks about that in his book. It's very close to equal anyway. So the better thing to do is play here first. And now it turns out this ending is pretty bad, as you can imagine. White's got space, and black's king is stuck in the center. So that's the move. And then I talked about this move H4. And the first thing that I said wrong, because I was doing this all from memory, is that if he takes this, I was talking about playing check, and maybe here, and I don't know how good this is, but it's possibly quite strong. But more importantly, this move is very, very strong, attacking here. The main point being if the knight tries to get out of being trapped, then rook takes h7 is very strong, because if rook takes, queen takes, and you win the rook. I'm hoping that these sounds aren't coming through, but I guess it can't hurt anybody. All right, so that's the first sort of correction. More importantly, we have Schuyler's, I looked it up, the questioner was asking about Schuyler's book, and it turns out that he gives this move, which is in fact considerably better, and after this move here, and shows some lines. Well, let me just show you what he shows. He shows this move. Now notice that taking and check and knight g5 is not going to be any good. So that's a good first move. And here, this move, kind of a clever move, getting the pieces out quickly. And Schuyler gives this move knight c3. I want to mention that I think that is also better for white. I think they're both better for white. So I don't think it's really equal. Because this move is even better than playing knight c3 immediately. It's quite awkward. I actually give a lot of analysis here, but I'm realizing as time goes on in this show that you don't want to see too many complicated things, especially when we have so many questions. My tweet channel. There we go. Okay, so some people are on and the show is on, and I can see myself, so this is good. No technical problems so far. Let me talk about this for a second. Well, this line, I think you just have to, I've analyzed a lot, and I think it's quite good. I look at queen e7 and bishop b4, and the point is white's going to be able to take and get rook to e1 really fast and for a check without playing this move queen e2, which is okay, but not quite as dramatic. So that's one line, and the other line is to follow Schuyler's line, which is this, and then he gives, I think, bishop b4. Bishop d2 is a good move. Why allow your pawns to be doubled? And also the bishop might get on that wonderful diagonal. Knight here. And now he gives e5. Takes here, here, here. Sorry, someone doesn't want me to say here. Bishop d3, knight takes c3, b takes c3. Queen e7, he calls this unclear. Black's going to go queenside. I'm not so sure about that, but it's reasonable comment. I think the problem is with this, let me just see this for a second, is that after this move, the move h6 is quite good, weakening those dark squares. And I couldn't find a really good answer because after gh6, you just play here, and it turns out you have a really good game because if bishop takes, you have that bishop on the long diagonal. And this move, which is probably the best move, you still have this. And the dark squares are just awfully weak. I think that's right. Have we played e takes d first? Let me just see. I think maybe castles is the best move now because of that pin. But then white has that cute move. It's pretty clear that white stands quite well, not overwhelmingly. So I guess I still like the move h4, even though Schuyler does improve with d5. I think that this move is quite strong, even though it's kind of silly. There's many other ways to play this position, but I really like this move h4. I think it's just quite fun to make yet another pawn move. White hasn't made any developing moves, so that's always nice. All right, now a few other questions from earlier shows. Let me just see what's on the tab here. Which game is more beautiful, Anderson's best game or the Evergreen Immortal game? Well, I'd have to show the games, and that wouldn't make any sense to the reader to just ask that in general. So I think maybe I'll get that next week. Maybe I'll show the games, but I don't have them right in front of me, and otherwise the listeners wouldn't have any idea what that was about. So Anderson's are all wrong. Anderson with an E is correct. We get a little spelling correction there. Those are two famous games by Adolf Anderson where he sacrifices a bunch of things, and the games are against Dufresne, D-U-F-R-E-S-N-E. And the other one's against, what's wrong with me, Kizritsky. And they're both shown, by the way, in the Chess Hall of Fame, which I just saw in St. Louis, which was really fun. Those positions were shown among many other positions to illustrate some chess sets, and it's kind of fun. Okay, let me answer another question that I got. I want to catch up with some of these things that have been around for a couple of weeks and I haven't gotten to. One is, what is the state of correspondence chess? And I'm not an expert on this, but correspondence chess has changed a lot over the years. And I think that's pretty obvious because almost every league and tournament allows now the use of computers. They pretty much have to, or else someone would probably cheat, and that would be unfair. So this for me is a little depressing. It means correspondence chess doesn't have the romance it used to have. But there are some things. I mean, the problem is when you look at a correspondence game, even as a fan, almost every move is the first choice of the computer, or the second choice maybe if the two are very close, and especially if you let it run. And that's kind of sad, right? Because it means that players aren't really using their own ingenuity, and you also won't get a lot of surprise and speculative things. Now, okay, maybe the speculative things weren't the best moves always, but they were fun and difficult to meet and led to more interesting positions. I do know, however, that computer chess has improved in some ways, well, in terms of total quality, obviously, and that many top players, almost all top players, and the assistants they use, look now at correspondence chess as well as master games for their opening preparation to see which lines are being used, because obviously they're going to pick the best lines most of the time, and also to see if some favorite sharp line that they may have played their whole life has actually got a good solution to it or even been refuted. So that's basically my answer. I don't know a lot about it, but my own experience, I have several large correspondence databases, I use them pretty often, is that correspondence chess has lost a little of the fun side, the interesting side that it's had. And I suppose correspondence chess players will disagree with that. I'm glad to accept comments about that, or you can write me at the various sources I mentioned at the beginning of the show. So let me see what we've got here. Why is the Volga Gambit, we've heard this, we had this question last week, why is the Volga Gambit not played anymore in high 2700 plus level? What's happened? Is there some bad line for black? Is it all wrong? A terrific question. Oh, it's asked twice. It's asked by Aspidistra, who asked it last week. Aspidistra 76, and Sita Gazarian repeats it, apparently, or roughly the same question. Great question. I actually kind of put out an answer, so let me just see if I've lost. I want to look at my sheet here, because that way I won't forget something I wanted to say about it. I don't think I want to say that much. Well, let's show the Benko Gambit first of all. Great question. I think a lot of people are asking this question. After all, there's videos, there's countless books that say that the Benko Gambit is a good line, so why aren't they playing it? And here's the Benko Gambit, this move B5. This here is the modern Benoni. And there's some other versions, but those are the two main Benoni versions, or the Benko and the straight Benoni. Now, for a while, this line with G3 was considered good. This idea of playing with the move G3, for example, taking, black usually plays that first for technical reasons, and then here, and then here, and then here, and white Fianchettos with bishop G2, and black plays D6 at some point. And then there was this clever idea of playing, it's just a technical point, but that's what modern chess is a lot of times, of playing rook B1 before castling. I point out in one of my books that I think even if you do castle and they play the supposedly correct moves, that maybe white's slightly better anyway. I still think this may be still a little better for white. There are all kinds of clever ideas black has once rook B1's in of coming back there. Supposedly, though, I mean, apparently black's relatively satisfied with this just because he keeps playing the Benko. So, Benko fanatics keep playing it. And white kind of switched. And he switched to this thing called the king walk opening, partly because, which has been around forever, partly because Magnus Carlsen used it. So that goes like this. Here, excuse me, it's black's move. So he plays here, for example. Here, takes, and it's this line where you play this. You keep it, stay a pawn up, and you get a big center. And the idea is to play here and here. And let me show you a little more about that. Goes kind of like that. And black usually castles. And white plays the knight out. The big change here, now black has different ways to play this. Black's basic idea in the Benko Gambit is to get a couple rooks here. He's a pawn down, but it turns out it's very hard to organize these pawns without either losing one of them or making big weaknesses. Black, for example, can bring a knight there. He can put the queen out here on A5. There's a lot of pressure, and that bishop also exerts pressure here. It's a positional gambit, has been popular for many, many years. Pal Benko sort of originated it. Okay, the thing that white has been doing that's different is he's been playing this move A4. I'm going to get the order wrong probably, but he's been playing this move A4. Now, I used to play this before Carlsen, but Carlsen made people take a second look at it. And the point is that that's an interesting way to consolidate. Often, in his case, the queen went to E2, and some people have said that in some positions queen C2 isn't as good, but I've looked at positions where queen C2 I think is even better. The point is black has to either get his pawn back or get some sort of attack going, and the queen side can be defended better than usual. Sometimes there's an A5, but there's also this idea of getting B3 in and stopping knight C4. So it just turns out that white can organize better in this position than people had realized and stay a pawn ahead. And after all, the a pawn is a passed pawn, and he has nice central presence. So given that, the rook comes to e1. If white can consolidate, he's just a pawn up with good prospects, and that's discouraged black a lot. So that's as far as I'll go, but you look at that line and look at the recent games with it, and that's been the problem. I talked to one real Bank Gambit lifelong expert and someone who's played it always, and he just sighed and said that this line was giving him all kinds of problems. So I think that's your basic answer there. Now let me see other questions here. Seda must be a master too. The misspell master. Oh, that's very nice. Not fair. You have to type quickly. You're going to misspell some things. Bernard Rimschut, and you also corrected me. There we go. Okay. So then, and Aspidisha says maybe this is the critical line. I think right now, in theory, it is the critical line. Of course, theory is very, very, it's a very fashionable thing. So it might be that there'll be another line soon that's giving black trouble, or the Benko will come back big time. I think both those lines give some problems. I think Rook B1's a little better than maybe. People somehow are okay with it, but gee, I kind of like white mostly. But this line I've studied a fair amount, and it's quite good for white, I think. Okay, here let me look at some other questions that came in, because I don't want to get too far behind on, if people are nice enough to send questions, I should answer some of them. Here's one, in a game that starts out e4, g6, d4 here. Is it better, if black's going to play here, this move c5, is it better to continue with knight f3 or knight c3? Okay, so my answer is knight f3. Now that's a hyper-accelerated fianchetto. It usually comes up from the Sicilian, or often comes up from the Sicilian, with here, knight f3, e4, c5, knight f3, g6, d4, and then bishop g7, because black doesn't want to allow the Maroczy bind. So he plays bishop g7 first. And by playing bishop g7 first, if white plays something like this, then there's a lot of options. There's d6, there are queen a5 check lines. Those are the two main ones, I guess. And so white doesn't necessarily get a Maroczy bind. But I wanted to say that in Taming the Wild Chess Openings and earlier books that I've written, I've mentioned this move, which I think gets more powerful all the time. I think this ruins this order for black. So it's it's a good thing to know how strong this is. Now it turns out that after knight a6, which really nobody plays really, but this turns out to be good for white. He gets a lot of tactics in with queen d5 ideas, and it just, these double pawns are a problem. And maybe I should give one example. I think this has been played more often than anything else. Oh, it's white's move. So yeah, maybe even, I don't want to mess this up. Yeah, maybe even immediately some idea like this, because if he takes, bishop takes, there's a fork with a queen. A lot of tactical ideas in this line. If he plays e6, there's this idea, stopping mate. There's this idea hitting the rook. So at any rate, you might want to check it out with a computer and all that, but I'm convinced, everyone seems convinced that this is not good. That's the other way of trying to get the pawn back. So the main move is this. It's been around for years. And I like to play this move. And then you really have to take it back, because there might be a b4 move pretty soon, and white's just a pawn up with a nice center and reasonable development. So he has to take the pawn back. And then the best move here, I think, is this. And I don't think black can even come near equalizing here. There's a huge threat of playing knight here and bishop here, which seems a little abstract, but it's actually very strong. If black tries to play radically with check, you may have all kind of glanced at this move, then it turns out that this move, knight b5, is strong, threatening knight here and also threatening to come back and then just castle or move the king and play and trap the queen. The queen is trapped, and it turns out, okay, black has various tries to free it, but none of them are any good. So that's actually a blunder, bishop takes c3. And what other moves are there? Well, you might say, well, big deal, knight b5, I'll just stop it. But then you're completely doomed, because now bishop e3 is coming, and that's going to win material probably. And it's just a tremendously strong, well, it is going to win material, because after knight b6, there's going to be rook a7 followed by knight takes c8, hitting the rook with the bishop on e3. So that's actually another blunder. And what are some other ways to play this? Let me just see if I have anything I wanted to mention. d6 looks pretty good, but again, first here, and then d6, and then knight b5. And this is very hard to handle. For example, if knight here to f6, bishop e3, queen c6 on that pawn. Well, there's probably knight a7, but I think even better is this very nice move, hitting the knight and hitting d6. And the point is that if takes, I believe the queen has no moves at all. Because if the queen goes to its only two squares where it's not attacked, it gets forked with knight c7. There's a lot of traps in this line, by the way, you may have noticed. Anyway, the long and short of it is, and there's a lot more detail, black should probably play knight f6 first instead of d6, but it's still good for white. Not as good as the lines I just showed you. But the long and short of it is that knight f3, and if c5, d takes c5, gives white what I consider a considerable advantage. And this is kind of new material. You might want to look it up. There's a special move that white has to make, this b4 move, that secures this advantage. If you want to spend and or waste some money, you can get my book, Taming the Wild Chess Openings. And otherwise, you can just try and kind of work it out yourself. But I don't think black has an adequate response to this system, which is amazing because it's been around for many, many years. Let's look for some other questions. There's another question from the same person, but let me drag some other things. First, let me see what's happened in the question. In the question section, nothing. So let's just go ahead. Let me do some more questions. It's really great to catch up on some of this stuff. Are there any pitfalls to using the King's Indian setup against the English opening? And I think there are a couple of those, which I'll show you. Not necessarily drawbacks, but things you have to know. That's the English opening, and the King's Indian, as we know, is a combination of these moves. That's the King's Indian. So let's try it. Let's say black plays the King's Indian. And now both the systems I want to show you start with this. White at any point can transpose back into the main line King's Indian with that move. Whoops, sorry, here. Whoops, white's move. I'm spacing out here. So g3. They both come from g3. Typical English opening move, right? And black usually plays d6 first, otherwise he castles and plays d6. Now again, you can transpose into main lines playing that way. But I want to show you two different lines. Okay, here's one of them. One of them is playing with the move d3, this position. Thousands of games with this actually, not so many in modern chess as before. And one of white's ideas is just to expand on the queen side, maybe with rook b1 first and just go like that. And black has a couple of systems against this, so I'll show you real quickly. I don't want to spend too much time, and I'll show you the one I recommend. This is the traditional way of playing it, and this can come from what's called the closed English, which is c4, e5, knight c3, knight c6 first, and then you kind of wander around until you get this position. Various move orders to get to this position, so it's a very famous position. And white usually tries to attack, and there are many answers. One of the most popular systems is to slow down the attack a little bit, and then play this move. And the reason for that move is he doesn't, well, I'll show you. He doesn't, now at least black has the file as white attacks. And what black does is play this move. And the reason he played h6 was so that he couldn't be attacked with this move, knight g5. So white continues his little attack, and I won't go much further here, but this is a line that's been played over 1,000 times in master chess. So white has several plans here. The original and most popular one was just simply develop that in order to play rook a1 and challenge the file. Black usually plays here. He's got some ideas of this, and he has a big idea of playing like that. And there's even an alternate idea which has to do with putting the rook somewhere. Sometimes I think it's c8, and then playing b6 to really stop white's queenside attack from crashing through. And yet one more plan, I'll just real quick say one more plan is to play this knight back and play for the move f5. And this knight might go to c5, but in general it protects the queenside against the kind of attack white wants to further, for example, by playing c5. Complicated. There's a lot of things going on. I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but that's the basic breakdown. So both sides have played that for years, which means that it's a system you should know as black if you want to play the black side, and it can be very fun. I've played it for white. Now, if you've played this exact move order, there's a lot of options. And one line I would recommend, I think it's a little stronger than its reputation, is to play this move immediately. So you don't really tell the opponent what you're doing exactly like you do sometimes when you play for c6 and here. Now, one point of this is that now when you do play c6 and d5, this pawn will be protected, so there won't be a simple knight e5 move. The other point is that e4 is actually quite a good move. It turns out that opens up this bishop, and the rook can become fairly active, even though it looks exposed on e4, and you have no weaknesses. So e4 can be a big move. And if white retreats to stop it, which is sort of a standard idea, then you switch back to this. idea, and you just get a big center. And white really can't stop that. That doesn't mean he's doomed, but the other plan is just to play c6 and d5 no matter what white plays, except for one move. And this was considered maybe a decent answer for quite a while. In fact, I've played that as white years ago. But I think there are two good answers. One is it turns out that winning the bishop pair, even though you've lost a lot of time and influence here, that it's really just fine. You can just come back and develop your pieces, and then you have two bishops. Now, white has really nice central control, so that's maybe an equal game, but it's not a bad game for black. The other idea is quite easy. You just play here, and the idea is to retake with a knight, which is very harmonious. If he takes there, white can stop that, but I would say that that's not very dangerous because the queen's kind of misplaced. I don't know, you might even play something like this and come back here at some point. The queen's not really well placed. You'd rather have a knight there, just aiming at that queen side. So that's one system for black to play, which is this rook e8 move, and of course there's many others. Now the other system that I think gives you trouble when you play, or that you need to know at least when you play this move order, is this move, e4. And the idea is to play knight ge2, and this is a Botvinnik system. It's called the Botvinnik system, and you can play it with black too. Now e5 is okay. Let's just castle and play here. Now e5 is fine here, but the difference is that it can be a little awkward. You have to really know it. It's a little awkward because white's going to play here, castles, maybe h3, but in any case he's going to play this move f4, which threatens f5. If you take it, you have trouble in the center because white has an extra center pawn. If you don't take it, f5 can be a strong attack. And you can look that up. Now, I'm not saying white's better in this position, but I think it's hard to play for black. One of the things I used to think about a little bit was this kind of system. Not bad for black, but I would avoid this. Well, if you want to be safe, I would avoid it and just play that move, which is a reversed Sicilian, Botvinnik, reversed English. And it's kind of a Sicilian kind of position. And black just develops. And white usually develops like this, maybe tries to get that in, thinking about things like f4 and d4, but black's fine here. Black has, if white plays for a3, for example, let me see, it's black's move first. Oh, one interesting move here. Let me just show you one way to play this for black before I move on to other stuff. I think that move's very interesting. Because if white plays here, he's kind of blocking off his bishop, and it turns out white doesn't want to play f4 too early. So the move f3 can be a little bit of a disadvantage. By the way, this bishop can also go here because that discourages the move d4 because if bishop takes c4. So that's something to look into. And if this obvious move here, you give up the bishop pair. Now if the queen takes, knight's coming to d4 even with tempo. But giving up the bishop pair in a fairly static position, a semi-open position where there's an outpost already for black. Remember we've talked about if you give up the bishop pair, you better have an outpost. Well, here you've got a great outpost. And furthermore, you're a little better coordinated, and this bishop isn't very good either. So this position's been played quite a bit, and it seems to be okay for black. I don't know if it's worth showing anything, but just for example, it's black's move now. Here's one plan you can play. I don't even know if this is best. I've tended to play the knight there, but you can also put the knight here, and then when white does something, maybe tries to expand on the queen side, you can run into this move, and then that outpost is extremely well covered, and the knight is basically a knight is as good as a bishop if he's got a very strong outpost which can't be exchanged. And that's what's going on here. So that's a decent system to play, just as a kind of some advice what to play against those two English type King's Indians. Okay, let's see what we got. We've got some questions here. Let's go back here. We have quite a few things here. Or several things. Play e4. Okay, e4 is not a bad idea. Sita says, I'm not. Oh, he says, what do you recommend against the Stonewall system? Well, it depends which Stonewall system, but basically the main Stonewall system is a Dutch defense for black that goes like this. Just for example, this move. But one problem here is there's so many good things against the Stonewall. But for example, maybe even this right away. Or maybe first you play e6 to have a little flexibility. Now, one thing you can do against the Stonewall system and against e6 is play the knight here. That's a nice system because if that pawn ever goes there, one nice little reorganization you can do, let me just show you something, is, for example, usually the bishop goes there. one nice reorganization. Well, first of all, the bishop can go there with the knight following. Another point is this knight can go here. So the two knights are coordinating. A lot of times if you play knight f3, which of course is just fine, and white has some advantage here. Later on, what will happen is that if you want to move this knight out, you maybe have to try and put it on c3, and you'd like to put it there, but then there's two knights kind of stepping on each other's toes is the idea. They're both headed towards the same square, and it's really nice to have that knight on h3. So that's kind of a clever system to play against it. I've played that before. There's other things you can do. You can certainly play c4. I'm trying to think what some of the better and more interesting lines are against the Stonewall. The main line, but I should show you what basically the main line is. It's something like this, maybe c6, this. Pretty soon, white has to watch out for this a little bit, so he might play queen c2 or b3. One of the main lines goes like this, and black maybe temporarily stops this move, bishop here. But white can try and enforce it anyway. And this move is considered pretty good for black these days. This system's okay for black these days. Obviously, black's not better, but black's pretty happy with this kind of setup. He has several plans. One is to bring the bishop that way, and the other more common one is to play for b6, and maybe later c5. Looks like white's positionally better, but it turns out black's usually able to handle this kind of position. Another thing you can do is not play this way at all. Play with c4 early on, like here, and then the Stonewall's harder to set up effectively, and not always as good because this bishop can get out in front of it. Just for example, this, I don't know, I'm not sure about, I used to know more about these orders. That's an interesting way to play. And then here. That's not really what black was looking for. Black was looking to block off this bishop on g2 by playing c6 and d5. So that's another thing you can do. So that's a quick answer to that. There's other things. Okay, so knight h3 move useful if black changes his mind and plays the d6 system. Yeah, it is. As long as you've played e6 first, it's considered a pretty good line. So what was that? Does everybody understand that question? The question is, if black's playing the Stonewall, for example, like this, and white can throw this move in first. It's possible that you should play that first before you play here, just to see what black's doing. But if black plays a d6 move, well, let me see, it's white's move first. Let's say he goes here right away. Maybe that's a little early. The thing is that now, okay, you don't play knight f4 early because he might play e5 with tempo. But black's sort of lacking ideas here. Black stands kind of passively here. You go back to a standard line. You go back to this, and you're thinking about e4. And, the knight's still pretty well placed. It's got ideas of playing here sometimes after e4. And the bishop's still free. So, yeah, you can still play knight h3 in these positions. Some people will claim that black's okay there. I think Stonewall fans would definitely say that, but I think I like white. Okay, good question. Excellent question. And, okay, so no more on the chat right at the moment. So let me talk about other things that people have sent. John, in your okay, this was last week. I want to catch up on things that were on chat too. QWEDFV on the actual channel asked, John, in your series on the Chigorin, I think it was on the channel, might have been by email, or on my ICC account, John L. Watson. John, by the way, if you forget that account, it's written on this board here, at the top of this board here. John L. Watson, and Ask the Master, which is the Twitter hashtag, is there, and also that's my email, askthemaster@chessclub.com. Okay, so the question is, John, in your series on the Chigorin defense, you consider the following position. I can't remember the exact move order you used to have black getting into the position, but it's the position after d4, d5, c4. Oh, I'm sorry, not c4, excuse me. Let me read this. Bishop f4. Now, the Chigorin normally goes c4, knight c6. That's the Chigorin defense proper. But in my lectures, I try to talk about what you would do against bishop f4 and knight f3, those kinds of moves. So one thing I mentioned is you can still play knight c6 if you want to be consistent. But that doesn't mean it's the best move. I tend to think white gets tiny advantages here, but it's just a way to play if you want to not play into main lines. Okay, here's c4. And I give bishop f5 as an active try. One of the ideas is to try to get that move in. White plays knight c3. Now obviously if he played there, you just develop your rook, which you want to do anyway, and then you chase the knight back. So that would be silly. And then I give probably e6. Yeah, now I don't know about the exact order here either, but you get to this position. That's certainly plausible. Now you say black gets easy play with bishop d6. This was in my ICC lecture series on openings. Very long series. And one of the, actually I've had several repertoires, and one of the repertoires was on the Chigorin defense. And what about the computer's recommendation? He asked bishop g5, exclamation point, pressure on d5. And that's a very good question. And the first thing to say is, yeah, I agree. I think white's a little better here. I don't think it's overwhelming, but I think it's a good move. And because there's a direct threat on there. And last week I was trying to answer this on the top of my head, and I mentioned this move and I mentioned this move as being two interesting looking moves. And actually the computer agrees with me. Those are the two top moves it gives. However, it doesn't really say it's equal. I was worried about this move, if you recall, because I was afraid of losing this pawn here. I wasn't sure because black's got two bishops and is active, but it turns out that black can play well against this by just defending that pawn, and then it turns out that taking this pawn is gives black plenty of play. Notice that that's hanging on the 7th rank. So probably castles first is the best move, I decided when I was looking at this over just recently after getting the question. And now you have rook b8 as an idea. You also have c5 as a good counterattacking idea. White's undeveloped, not castled yet. I think you'll find this is plenty of compensation. However, white doesn't have to play bishop f6. White can just maybe rook c1 or something like that. I think white's a little better. But at least it's playable for black. There's no huge advantage here or anything. And then the other move that I had mentioned was this, which was the computer's second choice. And I think, again, rook c1, stop the doubled pawns, get the rook on that file, because you're about to play c takes d5 maybe. And black should just castle. At least black's ahead in development, so I might as well continue to stay ahead. And then just take this, open the c file. And I just think white's a little better here. Just play here, neutralize that strong bishop. And the knight's not very well placed there. However, this is also quite playable for black. It's just not great fun. This is a possible move, I suppose, later. You know, your development lead helps you a little bit, keeps you kind of in the game. Okay, so that's the answer to that question, which was a great question. And bishop g5 does probably give a little plus equals. So maybe easy equality was not what I should have said. I should have said rough equality or slight disadvantage or something like that. All right. We're not getting, am I right? We're not getting chat questions here. Is that possible? Folks, millions of viewers, I'm sure, and we need some questions going on here. I have more things from last week and other things that people have asked, but I think I'll slow down a little bit. One general question, the kind that plenty of people have asked me over the years is, and maybe I partially addressed this, but not enough. It says, please, this is Z3N Path. He says, please, some advice about how to improve a player with a 2100 ELO for several years. In other words, he's had it for several years. And let me get rid of that so I don't distract you. And of course, that's a very hard question to answer. I am a teacher, and it's awfully hard to improve, period, from 2100 or any other rating. So what it really depends on are what are your weaknesses and what you need to work on. It does help to have a coach to look at these things. Sometimes players are pretty aware of their own weaknesses, and they don't really need a coach. But in any case, you need to know what they are. You need to be very self-critical and try to work on those weaknesses. Now, the obvious things that teachers and coaches will always agree on, and I think it's true, is you need to play a lot, especially these days where all your opponents are playing a lot. And obviously playing online is the main way to do that these days, but of course it's better to play over the board in tournaments because, well, for one thing, those are the ratings you eventually probably care about, and they're live and they're just more realistic than staring at a screen. But the other thing is that most online games are shorter time controls. I just don't think you gain that much from blitz games. You get to practice your openings, and that's nice. So there's nothing wrong with playing blitz games. But it's even been shown statistically that players who play too many blitz games, play tons of them, the ones that play the huge amounts, have a tendency to actually lose rating points, blitz rating points. So why is that? Well, because you're thinking more and more superficially. You're getting into the habit of thinking superficially. So my online recommendation is play as many 45-minute games as you can. I know it's hard to get those sometimes. However, there are these team tournaments that some of my students play in, and they seem great. You play regularly, you play on a team, and they're 45-minute time controls. And the point is that's time enough to think about the positions. That's time enough to really consider what you're playing and why you're playing it, and whether you want to do something slightly more original and not just your first instinct, and why maybe your first instinct is wrong. If you look at it for a while, you'll say, hey, really, even though that's the move I'd make, it's maybe not such a great move. You get a chance to get used to positions and structures in a way that's profound and interesting. Whereas if you play a lot of blitz, well, maybe you'll improve your ability to play quickly. I doubt if you'll improve your intuition, though, because a good intuition is based on playing good moves. And your intuition is going to be increased. Your bad intuition is going to be increased as much as your good intuition when you play a lot of blitz. You're going to play a lot of moves quickly that are simply not very good moves because they're the move you think is best because you're a 2100 player or a 1400 player or a 1600 player, and you aren't a 2800 player. And so be very careful about not playing too much blitz, or at least counting on it, or even worrying maybe you're going to gain a lot of rating points on the blitz rating points. But to me, that's fairly meaningless, even though it might be fun. What else? Now, if you can't get to overboard tournaments, you play these slower games. These 15 and 25-minute games are also useful, a lot better than 5-minute games, because at least you get a chance to think. But it's also, I think, helpful and even inspiring to play over games collections, something different too. Now, of course, you should be studying openings and end games, and make sure you do that. But if you're getting bored with that and you aren't improving, take best games collection. Maybe some player you really like, or maybe somebody who plays the same openings you play. Annotated game collection, and see what you think. It's a lot of fun. And as I say, pretty inspiring sometimes. So let's see if we're doing, there's a recommendation to join a 45-45 league, which are on ICC, and it's what I was talking about. That's exactly a great idea, I think. You get really good, you get really excellent experience doing that. And it's enough, 45 minutes is enough to play a pretty good game, and maybe more importantly, it's enough to slow you down and make you think a little bit. Ideally, you should be going to tournaments and playing 2-hour time controls and 90-minute with 30-second increment time controls and that kind of thing. Okay, here's a question from Aspidistra76. What's your opinion about the Konstantinopolski opening? I'm not aware of that name, but here it is. Here. E4, E5, knight F3, knight C6, and then G3. It's clear that black has no problems here, but it seems interesting. Yeah, okay. I mean, you could almost look at this as by the way, I don't know this opening at all. I usually know all the irregular openings, but you can almost look at it as you've got a Vienna game and you give black an extra move, and he says, well, why not just play there and get castled and be ready to meet D4 with E takes D4 and have a good long diagonal. So that's good. Now, let me see if I can see some disadvantages to it. Let's go back to what the actual question was. The actual question was this. Okay. One problem I can see right away, maybe. I better be a little careful about even saying this because I'm just not sure about it, so I should be careful. The natural move, obviously, is this. And then if white plays here, by the way, you have what's called a Gleck system. That's the 4 knights opening. I won't show you those moves, but it's pretty obvious. Both sides bring out their knights. And then white plays here. That's the Gleck system. I had a long time ago, my student, the world junior champion, Tal Shaked, we were playing this for a long time. And then Peter Lecko won a game against Tal with just normal moves, just playing like that. By the way, this is fine for white. It's still played, but actually it's not played that much anymore, which is kind of sad. It was one of these systems. This is okay for white. We actually always thought, well, with the pressure here and maybe a clever either D3 and here, or maybe even D4, white would get good play, but I don't believe it anymore. I think that game convinced me that black has just a good center and an active position. And so, although it might be equal. But that's an aside. That's if white transposes. So I guess if white's not going to transpose, he has to protect that some other way. And I guess D3. Or he could try to play really aggressively like that, but what are the odds of that working? I'm just not convinced. Just take here, I think, would be fine. Or takes. So I guess white would be playing like a King's Indian attack kind of position, or a Philidor kind of position, but with the G6 line. So maybe just play a reverse Philidor, because white no longer has the option of playing this structure. He has to play with the bishop there, which means he's probably going to take this and play the G3 Philidor tempo up. That could be fun for both sides. Black should probably block that E file because white's plan is to play here really fast, and maybe D4. So yeah, okay, that looks fine for white. Now black can also play slowly here, though. Once D3 is in, black can just develop, and I don't know, something like this. It's hard to believe white has anything here. On the other hand, it's a game, isn't it? And you can aim for this kind of thing. Probably going to castle. So it's a game. Not much fun, is it? I don't know if what Asperdistra thinks of what I'm saying. He might want to make a comment because it doesn't look that thrilling for white, does it? But that you didn't claim it was. You just asked what about it. So now the immediate D5 I kind of mistrust. That's no good, so you probably have to take it. And then that extra tempo is cool. Now the interesting thing is that even though white has a whole bunch of extra tempi here, there are these ideas of E4, and so you have to be a little careful here. If you had to slow down and stop E4, probably black would stand well, but actually I think as long as black can't play E4, and he really can't here because of just castles for one thing, and if takes rook E1, I think. Although actually that's a lot of material for the queen. Maybe just knight G5 winning the E pawn might work. Doesn't really win it, does it? Because after takes there's an F5. Okay, this has to be analyzed, but so you have to look at this. It's a critical line. Somehow I feel like black's a little too far behind in development here. Just not thrilled with this. Maybe a better way of doing this would be here, but then you have weaknesses on this side of the board. Well, something to look at. I'm not going to make more stupid comments than I've already made because I'm not really sure. I suspect you can just go ahead and do this and have a pretty good game, but because after you get castled, of course, you have rook E1 and D4, and then you're much better. But can white get those moves in? It's not absolutely clear. All right, okay, so good question. Probably haven't answered it as thoroughly as I should have. Well, D5 I thought was probably just a bad move, so you could even play that maybe. Be scary. The obvious moves are things like bishop here, and although I suppose you better at least look at that kind of idea. And knight F6 is the move almost any grandmaster would make. It looks hard to defend that, doesn't it? And if you're willing to play the Gleck system as black, this is the Gleck system again, which most people are, then you've kind of solved your problems. Okay, but it's not like black's better. All right, now let's see what else we have here. How would you tackle the black side of the King's Gambit? Great question, Iberia. It's been so long. Thanks in advance and regards. Okay, so let's look at, this is the King's Gambit. You give away this pawn, but you get the F file, and you get your pieces out really quickly, and you get 2 center pawns to 1. That's the idea. Huge book by John Shaw on the King's Gambit. Now, before I get to a sort of the normal answer, I suspect if I was now playing E4, E5, and I was black, that I would go right into these lines, the so-called Kieseritzky lines, where you play here and here. And for example, there's a line that goes like this, and you just have to know what you're doing. Knight F6, and there's all kinds of things. That's if I had a chance to study it a lot. I get the feeling that's a real problem. The line a lot of my students have played is, well, first of all, you can get it. Okay, I'll show you what it is. It's basically here. And then if white takes it, you play here. I think this is a perfectly good, solid line for black, completely equal, with plenty of chances. And the best way to get to that position, by the way, is to play the Falkbeer counter gambit. Because white's only good move here is takes, as it turns out. You can look that up. And when he takes, this is the Falkbeer counter gambit, but you don't play that. You play here, and guess what? You're threatening queen here, check, and so white plays here. And then you play here, and that's the position I was just talking about. This position is maybe what I'd play if I didn't have a little time to study, because I've studied it before with my students. White's got ideas. It's not lost or anything, but it's a very solid position for black. The other thing you do is play some irregular line, especially if you're playing a lower player, but maybe not. Here's something I think Keen put a lot of time into, playing here. The idea is white's king side is weakened, and of course you have a kind of a threat too, going here. And if white plays here, you can always stop the move, knight d5. You might have other moves too, but I think that's the easiest one. And So that's kind of a cute line, and I think it works pretty well too. There's the Norwalder, but that's a little too risky. Queen here. What are some other irregular lines for black? Oh, I know one thing you can do. Sometimes playing knight c6 early on. Now, white can't take that because of check. Leads to some original positions. Arthur Bisguier used to play this. I hope I remember how it went. And I was very impressed. I think, believe it or not, I think you can get away with this move. I hate to say that. It looks so stupid. But, and then I guess if it, is that right? I don't understand. I don't think you can get away with knight takes. You could look at it. Oh, yeah, there's all sorts of complications dealing with, I don't know who comes out better here. Dealing with knight g6 check for white. But I don't think it's decisive because the knight's trapped in the corner. I think this position is actually rather interesting. But that wasn't the one I was thinking of. But this is something that's been played, and it may be reasonable. Why is knight c6 a reasonable move is the question. What move? Oh, now taking. That's right. Okay. That's to stop him from playing bishop c4 first. That's to stop the bishop's gambit, which, by the way, is this one, which my student Abby Marshall played for many years, and I think is perfectly fine for white, by the way, but just equal. Black can always equalize. If black plays here, it's a lot of fun because you're all ready to gain time on the queen. That's a fun line. Black doesn't usually play there, but other moves are okay too, as it turns out. d5 is played a lot. Knight f6 and c6 and d5 is played. White's better in quite a few of these lines actually, so it's a fun line to look at. So what was the question? How would you tackle it? Well, like I say, not knowing anything, I would play that modern line with this, and knight f6. Very safe. And studying it, I might try one of these irregular lines. I mean, I remember being very frustrated by this knight c6 nonsense. But, oh, and there's also another idea in knight c6, but you'd have to study it. It's the f5 line. Now, in our book, Taming the Wild Chess Openings, I think we give a really good answer to this, but it's considered okay. Right now, the theory is still okay. I think white's better. It's a fun line. The English played this. English players, Tony Miles played it a bunch, and so did some other English players. Okay, that's enough about the King's Gambit for now, I think. We have a question. Do you think engines like Stockfish and Komodo still have weaknesses? Do they misevaluate any types of positions? I think this is a strange answer. I have a strong opinion about this that really it doesn't make much sense because these engines are 2300. Can you imagine what that means? That means they're 500 or 450 points better than Magnus Carlsen. I mean, how can that be? And therefore, you wouldn't think they'd have hardly any mistakes. But I do opening analysis pretty much every day, either for my students or my books or myself, and very deep opening analysis. And what I find are the engines are just constantly wrong about positions, even when you let them stay for quite a while. And one way you can prove this is you can have them, you just make the move they recommend. You make the move you think is better for my side. And you sit for a while, let them make the best move they think, and then pretty soon you have a big advantage, or maybe even a winning position. So how can that happen? How can a weakie like me play against an engine like this and get the better game? Well, the real point is that I think, and it's a pretty obvious answer to someone, but it's still sort of amazing to me, which is that they simply don't make big mistakes. Engines don't make big mistakes. They also survive the early middle game sometimes just because their opening book has gotten them so far that they're able. Engine's weakest point, people don't believe this, but it's the opening, because the opening is the most complicated part of the game, and you can't, and also the most just amazingly fluid and flexible, and moves that don't seem that good in principle are quite good, and the reason they don't look weak in the opening is because they have these huge opening books. If you take away their opening books, it's surprising how weak engines can be. But the point is that they don't make big blunders, and when you look at even top-level games, you'll see that there's a lot of pretty major mistakes that people make in the course of a 40 or 50 or 60 move game, and that's really, engines obviously never make one that's really stupid. They may make anti-positional moves, but they just don't blunder, and that accounts for most of their strength, which is a little depressing. But I guess the answer to the question is I think they have big weaknesses, and one thing they still do, I think, and maybe some programmers will disagree with me, but I keep finding that they overrate rook and 2 pawns versus 2 pieces. They seem to think that really early on in the game, rook and 2 pawns are much better than 2 pieces, 2 minor pieces, excuse me, like bishop and knight or 2 bishops. And that's not very often true. They also think rook and pawn versus bishop and knight or 2 bishops is equal a lot of times, or sometimes even better for the rook and pawn when it's clearly better for white, and you can prove that very easily. So I don't understand that one, how they haven't fixed that evaluation yet. Now, obviously, in the endgame, rook and 2 pawns, or even rook and pawn, are often better than 2 minor pieces, because the rook is active, and maybe you have passed pawns somewhere, and the knight and bishop don't coordinate well, and it's not a middle game position. Middle game positions, those minor pieces are wonderful and fun to have, and the rooks can be quite awkward. Just because they don't, well, it's just hard to defend with 1 piece against 2 is basically what it amounts to. So yeah, so that's what I think about that. I've never been thrilled with that. Okay, laugh out loud. Kramnik said in the King's Gambit, white just loses a pawn and weakens his king side. It's a good point. Now, can he actually prove that? I mean, there are huge amounts of theory on the King's Gambit, and for a while, Fedorov was playing it, a strong GM, and he did lose some games. He lost a famous game to Shirov, for example, in a very important event. But when he lost, it was usually a line that later on you could see he could have been okay. He could have been fully equal, but just got outplayed in some complications. Nigel Short has played the King's Gambit a lot, and we're talking about an extremely strong player. He played it when he was young and older. So it's marginal. I mean, maybe it's equals plus. Maybe black has a small advantage if he plays right into one of these very theoretical main lines. That's denied by all the King's Gambit fans, but I suspect it's true. But to say that he's simply lost a pawn and weakened his king side, of course, is just a fun statement. Even Kramnik doesn't really believe it's easy to get a terrific game against it. 3,300, I thought I said that. Anyway, that's for the engines being 3,300. Okay, the double is, the point is that, someone might want to explain that. Porco Spino might say that. It's probably something I said wrong, but in any case. Oh, I did this for years till my early 20s until I realized I was doing it. I must have said the double is, which I'm surprised. I might have said the trouble is. I don't remember ever saying the double is. But the point is that it's better than whatever I said, I'm sure. Okay, so point well taken. Jim Tarzan, I find my engines are not that impressive in the endgame. They try to calculate out endings that are already known to human theory. Is that merely because I'm not using the best engines? Wow, great question. Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm not sure. Traditionally at the beginning, when engines first came out, endings were considered by far their biggest weakness. But for one thing, yeah, as John Hartman says, there are the table bases, which have gotten so sophisticated. So if you have 7 or fewer pieces, including the kings, I think it's been worked out to the end. So if you have an ending that the engine is studying, and even if it has 10 pieces, you get to a lot of positions. At the end of its search, you're getting to positions that have 7 or fewer, and it can tell you the exact assessment because it's actually worked out every single move. But I think that's encouraging that we have. Yeah, Jim is saying, I don't know about the Nalimov, I think it is, databases, but that only covers very simple endings. Well, very simple, somewhat simple, but you have 5 pieces besides the 2 kings. That can get pretty messy. He's thinking of more complicated endgames. After all, most endgames you have more than 7 pieces, including the kings. So that's a point well taken, but I think what John might say in response to that is what I just said, that even if you have 10 or 11 pieces, that allows the computer to look ahead, and then when it gets one of its Nalimov positions, it knows exactly what's happening. So that means it can make very good assessments of the lines that it's analyzing with some more pieces. So I guess, 7, I thought they'd gotten to 7 in most endings, but I guess not. There are some endings. 6, I think, am I right, John? He can answer this. Every ending is solved, I think, with 6 pieces. So the issue is, yeah, Nalimov. That's right. That's what they're called. And there's another one. There's some other table bases, one of which is very famous right now, but I just don't follow these things. That's supposed to be very good. Now, but I think what's interesting is Jim Tarzan knows endings incredibly well and plays them really well and has studied them in depth. So my feeling is that the engine does have some big gaps at certain points of the ending. And one interesting thing about that is it can afford to make opening inaccuracies in middle game positional misassessments, and it'll just come back and win the game anyway by making generally superior moves. If you don't find the right moves in the ending, even an engine might have trouble making up for it. So that's very interesting. And as I say, originally, well, the original engines really were bad at endings. For some reason, and but now I tend to think of them as pretty good because so much can be worked out concretely. So yeah, obviously it very much depends on the kind of ending. Jim's talking about endings that are probably fluid and both sides have six reasonable choices on every move, and of course the engine's going to lose track at some point. The Sicilian endings, yes, the in-game tables. So anybody can go look those up. Y, Z, Y, G, Y. Okay, no more questions for the moment. That's a great comment, though, because I don't know that about the endings, and now I do. So I'll keep an eye out for those to see what you say. Of course, the longer you run the engine on any position, probably the better it's going to do. But I don't know how much that applies. It depends on the ending, I guess. Okay, so certainly there are a lot of principles that don't always work that well in endings. A lot of times endings are very concrete, and just putting your rook behind the passed pawn or something turns out to be completely wrong. So if the engine is going by a bunch of principles that have been programmed into it, that might lead to quite a few mistakes. All right, so we get, let me see. Okay, oh boy, it's been a long show already. So maybe just one more thing. I don't have another question here, so let me quickly talk about another one that I was asked. Okay, this is easy to answer, I think. I thought your bishop's opening repertoire on ICC was very interesting. The bishop opening is this. I gave a complete e4 repertoire. You can look at it in the archives, of everything against e4. And against e5, I actually kind of did something a little unusual just because it was easier to do and might be interesting, which is the bishop's opening, often transposing. He says, it seems like a good alternative to playing the Ruy Lopez. You might want to discuss the pros and cons of this opening. Well, first of all, it's just not, a lot of lines aren't even book lines, so that's good. If you look at a lot of the books, they give this, repertoire books for black, they give this line. I'm not saying this is the best line, but they seem to give it a lot. This idea, sort of refuting the bishop's opening. By the way, if you play here, you're back in a Vienna game, and of course there's the famous, this move is famous. Or if black wants to avoid this, this is a very interesting move. And but this line is quite famous, the one where white plays here, the Dracula variation, the what is it called? Frankfurter Dracula. Someone's going to know what that's called. Opening, which threatens mate, and this is extremely messy. Black can play black here, defending that and there, and white can just retreat. And if black plays there, white can start attacking. And a lot of you have seen this before. So you could play into a Vienna game, but you have to face that. So what I give is this. I don't want to. This repertoire is supposed to be for real players who don't have to study for hours and hours. And the only disadvantage to this move. Now white has ideas maybe of f4 at some point. Probably not too early. You better be a little careful. And just developing and not having the same problems that he has in the Ruy Lopez. But he can also play like in the Ruy Lopez. He can play knight f3 next. Let me make a stupid move just for fun. He could play something like knight f3, and then he can switch. There are other plans you can play. For example, knight here, like in the Ruy Lopez. These kinds of ideas. So just to show you that. So that's why black often plays that move. And then you get this very interesting position here, which I've always thought white had nice, interesting chances in. The basic threat is to castle, take this and play rook e8 and actually win that e-pawn or get great pressure in the center. You've also got another idea of playing knight c3 and bishop g5 to put pressure on d5. So, for example, let me just see what I can say here. Okay, well, it's now, okay, so it's now black's move. Oh, and you might wonder why he can't take that. Well, he can, but that's quite a good answer. It's kind of a fun answer. It's not decisive because black can give up that pawn, but it turns out white's better here. And if black plays the normal move, which is this, then you can either take it an early stage or castle first. I can't remember which one is probably better, but you both are okay. And but the basic idea is that you get this kind of structure, and then you've got the knight attacking that, and if the pawn advances, the bishop's line is opened, and you have the rook coming over here to attack this. And you have moves like bishop g5, which put more pressure on d5. It's fun. It's a lot of fun. Whether white has a forced advantage, I don't know, but he gets an interesting game. So that's, I guess I didn't really answer that question, but we're over an hour, and I think it's good time to sort of wrap up here and just say thank you, everybody, for being on the show. And let me remind you that you can contact me in various ways. Maybe the best one these days is the email askimwatson@chessclub.com, because then you can ask a nice complicated question if you want to. There's also the Twitter channel, which is hashtag AskIamWatson. And of course, you can just come on to this show and participate in the chat, which is the most fun of all, and ask me a question, try and stump me, which is pretty easy to do. And what else? What am I missing? I'm missing one version of how to contact me. Oh, the Twitter channel. Did I mention the Twitter channel? Yeah, Ask I Am Watson. And oh, you can send to my ICC handle. You can message John L. Watson and ask. I've gotten several of those, and ask a question that way. So right now, for example, if you're on ICC, you can message space John L. Watson and give me your question or comment or whatever you want to. So thank you, everybody. I'm wrapping up, and I had to check those methods, but I think I got them right. And hopefully I'll see you next week. Send me questions, and I hope you enjoyed yourself. I think this whole show has a lot of potential, because when I was doing my shows before, all my different shows, middle games, openings, everything else, I used to get questions by email a lot, or by message. And hopefully I'll get the same kind of interest from the people who watch. So spread the word that you can ask me any questions you want via this show. Tell your friends, tell your students. And thank you very much, everybody. Oh, no.